This month's news was made possible by 625 Patreon supporters and by our proud sponsor, Surfshark VPN. Viewers would be forgiven for only seeing two guys arguing and more people getting sick as the only topics hitting headlines this month. But like always, looking past page 1 is where we get the spiciest stories of them all.
So hang on, whoa, whoa. It ain't our time to die. It ain't our time to die.
This month saw a full-scale war take shape, larger bribes than most people will make in a lifetime, and protesters getting gunned down where they stand.
It ain't our time to die.
However, this month also saw an incredible amount of people rally for a better future, and although the world can seem to come undone with the actions of the few, it's good to know that the many still very much have a hand on the wheel. Here's the news for the world for October 2020. Like always, we'll try to keep COVID-19 to a minimum. This month still sees the United States as the undefeated champions when looking at confirmed cases and related deaths, but this doesn't mean that India isn't doing their absolute best to claim that #1 position. Brazil remains comfortably in 3rd place, and it is unlikely that these top 3 nations will be challenged in the foreseeable future. We'd also like to congratulate both Spain and Argentina for reaching the million case milestone. The most notable case of corona this month was none other than former radio show host and current US President Donald Trump. Medical experts suspect that Mr. Trump's infection came from a super spreader event in the White House Rose Garden, which did not see widespread mask use. The president was then transferred to one of the top treatment facilities in the United States, where he was treated with an experimental cocktail of drugs, which seemed to aid in his fast recovery. It is currently unclear whether this treatment will be adopted more widely, as the medication is not readily available in large quantities. Long-standing tensions have escalated into all-out war between the Caucasus nations of Azerbaijan and Armenia as the two sides bitterly fight over the Nagorno-Karabakh region, which has long been a disputed territory. To understand why these countries are currently engaged in deadly conflict, we'll need to open up the textbooks and prepare for a fun lesson in history. In 1921, Joseph Stalin gave the Nagorno-Karabakh area to Azerbaijan, and 2 years later, turned it into an autonomous region. This is where things get messy. The entire region of Nagorno-Karabakh resides within the borders of Azerbaijan, but despite this, 90% of the population of Nagorno-Karabakh considered themselves Armenian. On top of this, most Armenians were Christian, as opposed to the Muslim majority of Azerbaijan. There was no fucking way this could go wrong. The situation went mostly without bloodshed for roughly 70 years, but as the Soviet Union began to evaporate, so too did the threat of its powerful military if the region broke into conflict. In 1988, the region passed a resolution stating that it wanted to officially join Armenia, and 3 years later, the Nagorno-Karabakh territory declared its independence from Azerbaijan. War in the region broke out from 1991 to 94, and after the fighting stopped, Armenia had claimed the Nagorno-Karabakh region and roughly 20% of the surrounding territory. Even to this day, the headcanon of the two countries involve each side claiming ownership over the region, with Armenia on cultural and ethnic grounds, and Azerbaijan on a geographic foundation. Despite Armenia's 30-year occupation of the territory, the Nagorno-Karabakh region is overwhelmingly recognized as part of Azerbaijan among the international community. Ever since this war that claimed 30,000 lives, the two nations have seen a variety of smaller conflicts over the region, including a 4-day war, which claimed 350 people in 2016, in which both sides claimed victory. We now come to the most recent war, which really got going at the end of September. Like most conflicts, both sides claimed the other fired the first shot, and both Armenia and Azerbaijan have accused each other of attacking not only military, but civilian targets. Before the world could even come to grips with what the fuck was happening, the nation of Turkey decided to involve itself in the fighting by supporting Azerbaijani forces with both foreign fighters and drone support. This surprise on behalf of Turkey was certainly unexpected, but it did explain the 2-week combined military drills conducted in late July. Experts explain that there are 3 main reasons for Turkey to jump into this clusterfuck. Firstly, Turkey and Azerbaijan share strong ethnic and religious similarities, and Turkey has, shall we say, a less than favorable relationship with Armenian people in the past. The second reason is that Azerbaijan is a huge gas exporter to Turkey and also one of its best customers when it comes to weapon exports. The third reason is slightly more complicated, but as a nation of Turkey aims to claim a greater role in diplomacy in the region, direct involvement now will ensure it has a greater sway over diplomatic negotiations going into the future. The international reaction to the conflict has so far encouraged de-escalation, with the United States, Russia, Germany, the European Union, France, Iran, and even the Pope all calling for an end to the bloodshed. Pakistan, on the other hand, is entirely on the side of Azerbaijan, mostly because it's the only nation on earth that does not recognize Armenia as a state. There's probably a good reason as for this oddly strong stance, but we frankly couldn't really be fucked to find out why. As of time of writing, the two sides have already agreed to 2 separate ceasefires, but both instances were only able to quell the fighting for a few hours at a time. Both sides accuse the other of breaking the terms of the agreement. There have since been reports of war crimes being committed by both sides of the conflict, but due to the sources we used as having a shaky level of credibility at best, we can't really say much with any real certainty. As of time of writing, it is unclear when the fighting within the region is likely to come to a conclusion, but third-party estimates predict that casualties of October alone number at around 5,000 people. As we seem to have gotten so many requests to cover individual nations going to shit, and because we don't have enough time to expand on them all in depth, we are instead going to speedrun a select few worth mentioning. In Argentina, citizens have taken to the streets over the government's handling of the coronavirus pandemic, which has seen it take the number 6 spot as the most infected country on earth. The citizens of Argentina are placed in a situation facing most nations around the world, where they are stuck between locking down the country to stop the outbreak and facing the consequences of living with an economy crippled even before COVID-19 swept over the continent. Other protesters were present for different reasons, with some calling for corruption cases to be investigated and others who opposed recent reforms to the justice system. In South Africa, the president has rejected claims by pressure groups that spikes in attacks on white farmers constitute ethnic cleansing. South Africa has received criticism that its white minority farmers have been victims of targeted attacks by members of the black population. However, President Cyril Ramaphosa was quick to dismiss any notion of a coordinated racial genocide and instead asked citizens to view these murders as acts of criminality. South Africa, as a nation, has historically had extremely turbulent race relations, and the president has pointed to these events as examples of just how easily the tinderbox of race hatred can be ignited. South Africa as a nation, unfortunately, has an extremely high murder rate, with police statistics within the country showing that out of over 21,000 murders in the 12 months preceding April this year, 49 of which were white farmers. Claims of white genocide within South Africa have gained traction among white supremacist groups across the world, and most notably, US President Donald Trump, who vowed to investigate these murders in 2018. These are the statistics on farm attacks and murders in South Africa, according to the South African Police Service. Viewers are, as always, free to make up their own minds. In Indonesia, protests in 60 locations across the country saw workers conduct walkouts to oppose a statute that would amend more than 75 laws related to employment. Should these changes come into effect, protesters argue that they would allow companies to cut worker pay, eliminate days off, and make it legal to hire contract workers in place of permanent employees. However, the head of Indonesia's Investment Coordinating Board argued that these laws are primarily designed to make it easier for job seekers to find work after the number of unemployed citizens within the country jumped from 7 million to 13 million, primarily due to COVID-19 related factors. Many workers and environmentalists within the country feel as if they were not consulted during the decision-making process and state that these deregulation efforts could have a devastating climate-related impact. The Indonesian Trade Union Confederation announced that they would block the implementation of the new law if they found it necessary. In Israel, the investigation into corruption charges into Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have finally gone to court. Mr. Netanyahu has been accused of greatest hits charges, such as fraud, bribery, and breach of trust. This includes over $250,000 in bribes and illegally influencing national media to be favorable to his time in office. The 5-stage trial is expected to take up to 3 years, involve over 300 witnesses, and marks the first standing leader to face trial in the country's history. Mr. Netanyahu denies any wrongdoing and plans to remain Prime Minister until November 17th next year, when his role will be taken over by a man called Benny Gantz. This is because two parties within the country found themselves in a stalemate after the 2019 election, and instead of wasting more time deciding who should run the country, just decided it would be easier to take turns. In Nigeria, citizens took to the streets to demand police reform within the nation, and specifically to put an end to a special anti-robbery unit who has been accused of kidnapping, harassment, and extortion, which is essentially just robbery with extra steps. After over 100 cities across the country joined this movement to demand police reform, the government eventually responded and has vowed to replace the anti-robbery unit with an entirely different special operations police team. However, as 10 protesters were killed over the course of the first week of demonstrations, it would be difficult to conclude whether the Nigerian government truly understood the protester demands. The Nigerian president has since blamed the violence on hooligans, but as of time of writing, at least 70 people have been killed during demonstrations. I was lucky enough to get a stockpile of footage from a citizen within the country, which included police firing into crowds, a man lying on the ground being executed, and a man's heart beating inside his exposed chest. For obvious reasons, we don't intend to show this footage, but the police brutality in Nigeria was by far the worst story we covered in this month's episode. The intermediary between myself and this Nigerian citizen has not been able to contact them since being sent this stockpile. In Hong Kong, the start of October marked China's National Day, and for many protesters who have been demonstrating tirelessly for an independent Hong Kong, the death of the once democratic region. Since the Chinese government imposed its new security laws in June of this year, the frequency and scale of its once gargantuan demonstrations seem to have come to an end. However, although protesting in a traditional sense has been outlawed and heavily policed, the sentiment behind the pro-democracy movement is still very much alive. 10,000 protesters have been arrested since the start of demonstrations in early 2019. Over 2,500 have been injured and 2 have been killed. It's currently unclear how this movement of some of the most organized and creative protesters in the modern day will adapt to these new restrictive laws, but the 1st of October marked a dark day for Hong Kong and for the very concept of democracy. We now come to Belarus, which is eventful as always. For those out of the loop, the Belarus elections, which were held in August, saw the notoriously unpopular long-sitting president and presumably used car salesman, Alexander Lukashenko, announcing that he had won 80% of the vote. The clear favorite to win, Svitlana Tsikhanovskaya, immediately fled to neighboring Lithuania, where she announced that the results were clearly bullshit and that she was therefore the elected leader of Belarus. She later vowed to create a temporary provisional government upon her return, and finally transform this effective quarter-century dictatorship into a democracy. Really big fucking protests have been raging since she's been in exile, and in October, there have been 3 main developments. Firstly, Alexander Lukashenko was formally sworn into office, but not before he got his bonus for finally selling that 2001 Honda Civic with the leaky radiator. Secondly, the president's challenger, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, has officially been added to Russia's most wanted list, and although this is obviously going to look pretty fucking cool on her resume, considering she was just an English teacher a few months ago, it comes after the Russian state poisoned a prominent Russian opposition leader in August this year. The third development involves the protesters themselves, who have come across the very annoying problem of getting arrested by authorities and very often tortured before release. The protesters have discovered that the security forces, who tend to do a lot of fucked up shit, don't like being unmasked, and in many cases, actually flee a scene if their face has been exposed. Those demonstrating actually went a step further, as not only have they started unmasking these individuals, but they've created a full-scale database of every single member of the security force they can find. This is done using a system of face matching technology and its network of 100,000 subscribers in an attempt to identify and make a record of people abusing citizens, and the project leaders have threatened to release the database to the public if violence isn't halted. The founder of the database has denied that his group was encouraging violence against the police and said that his intent is to make those responsible for violence feel responsible for their actions and to fear the legal retribution of their activities. Viewers who are planning an uprising against their own government might be interested in today's sponsor. If you're trying to remain invisible online or just trying to watch content not available in your country, then you'll probably want a VPN. Surfshark VPN will allow you to appear in any country of your choosing, which will not only make it impossible to be tracked by all 3 members of the North Korean Cyber Warfare Agency, but users can find a wealth of new Netflix content exclusive to other nations. No longer do you need to download dodgy files from LimeWire to watch Spider-Man 3. Simply change your location to Finland and enjoy watching this cinematic masterpiece as if you're viewing it from the happiest country on the face of the earth. Signing up with the code on screen will give viewers an 83% discount, 3 months for free, and users who are even 1% unsatisfied can back out in the first 30 days and get a full refund for any reason at all. Surfshark VPN, it's cheaper than the other ones. Former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd has publicly called for an investigation into news diversity within the country, and specifically the media company News Corp. For those who aren't aware, News Corp is owned by a man called Rupert Murdoch, who in turn owns hundreds of newspapers across the world. These include The Sun, The Times, The Daily Telegraph, The Australian, The New York Post, and The Wall Street Journal. Mr. Rudd has highlighted the dangerous nature of a single person owning such a large network of media outlets, and claims that Rupert Murdoch owns around 70% of newspapers within the country, which would be the highest in the Western world. The former Prime Minister has started a petition advocating for what's called a royal commission, which is something that Commonwealth countries like to do when something looks a bit dodgy. Unlike many other nations, Australia doesn't actually have a milestone that needs to be met for it to be discussed among the House of Representatives, and instead uses the widely adopted "that seems about right" method. As of time of writing, the petition has generated 386,000 signatures from members of the Australian public, and Mr. Rudd stated that he won't drop the matter once the petition has ended, calling himself a determined bastard. The Royal Commission request comes shortly after the son of Rupert Murdoch, James Murdoch, decided to resign from the board at News Corp after disagreements over editorial content being published, along with what he calls certain other strategic decisions. In talking with the New York Times, James Murdoch said, "A contest of ideas shouldn't be used to legitimize disinformation. I think at great news organizations, the mission really should be to introduce fact, to disperse doubt, not to sow doubt, to obscure fact." Kevin Rudd wasn't the only former prime minister who has become uneasy with the rising influence of News Corp. Julia Gillard, found it laughable what News Corp journalists published as facts. Malcolm Turnbull accused the media company of exchanging strategic leaks within the government for favorable coverage, and Tony Abbott once said that Rupert Murdoch arguably has had more impact on the wider world than any other living Australian. To the overwhelming majority of viewers, who probably don't know shit about the intricacies of the interpersonal relationships among former Australian prime ministers, these accusations hold much more weight than you might think. These former leaders of the country haven't exactly been best of friends with Kevin Rudd, with Julia Gillard literally leading a coup to overthrow him while in power, Tony Abbott acting as the leader of the opposition while Kevin held office, and Mr. Rudd famously calling Malcolm Turnbull a little fucking rat. However, Kevin Rudd later denied these claims, stating that what he actually called Mr. Turnbull was far more graphic. With so many reports of News Corp's already immense influence within Kangaroo Land and throughout the world, it will be interesting to see how far this call to action can travel when the petition closes on the 4th of November. The next segment might be uncomfortable, but the Swag News team strongly believes that this needs to be said. As viewers will know by now, we do our utmost to remain unbiased on political matters, unless of course it's dealing with clearly corrupt leaders or unethical governments. In this instance, however, we plan to take a side. We cannot in good conscience stay neutral on the leadership of the most free country on the face of the planet. A country that, although has seen turbulent times, has consistently remained a beacon of hope and a symbol of liberty to the rest of the world. This is why, after long hard deliberation, we'd like to congratulate Jacinda Ardern for her re-election as Prime Minister of New Zealand. As it turns out, the United States is also very close to having an election, which saw a handful of presidential debates between the two candidates. The first of which was widely considered the biggest shit show in the country since the nation's treasonous succession from the Commonwealth in 1776.
I want to make
Mr.
sure.
Mr. President, can you let him finish, sir?
He doesn't know how to do that. He has,
You'd be surprised.
As a response, the Swag News team made a video breaking down the two presidential candidates, purely based on their policies. That video has been live for about a week, so viewers who are so inclined can watch if they so choose. After watching the debates, there was mention of two specific groups by name that appeared to be quite controversial. These being Antifa and Proud Boys. As these groups seem to have limited to no presence in my own country, I thought it would be fun to find out who they are and why they seem to be significant enough to be mentioned within the debates. Antifa, short for anti-fascists, is not a concrete group, but rather a movement, typically made up of individuals who occupy the left-leaning fringes of society. The group attracts a variety of members, many of whom describe themselves as socialists, communists, anti-capitalists, or just straight-up anarchists. Often involved in acts of violence, law enforcement agencies have typically struggled to deal with Antifa, as the decentralized movement is devoid of leadership or headquarters, and its only clear identifiable ideology is its opposition to right-wing or fascist groups. The group has often been heavily criticized by a broad range of people within the United States, and during the George Floyd protests earlier in the year, US Attorney General William Barr called members violent radical elements and accused them of hijacking voices of peaceful and legitimate protests. Similar groups have been operating in and outside the United States since at least the Second World War, but Antifa specifically was founded in the city of Portland in 2007. Since then, members of the decentralized group have engaged in numerous violent disruption campaigns, which include attacking a white supremacist meeting with baseball bats in 2012 and throwing Molotov cocktails at law enforcement officers during George Floyd protests earlier this year. Although many of its members have advocated for non-violent means to express their ideologies, the Anti-Defamation League, as well as law enforcement officials, have both stated that the likelihood of violence increases whenever Antifa attends an event. The US president in September even went as far as to declare Antifa a terrorist organization. However, many experts have found this to be a troubling label for First Amendment and legal authority related reasons. In June of this year, a centrist think tank assembled a database of 893 terrorism incidents dating back from 1994 and didn't find a single murder connected to Antifa over this period. This streak was however ended 2 months later when a member of Antifa shot and killed a member of the Patriot Prayer group and was in turn shot and killed by US Marshals a few days later. There was also an attempted murder in 2017 that left 4 people seriously injured and the 66-year-old perpetrator left dead. Another recorded murder in early October was initially thought to be by a member of the movement. However, police ultimately found no ties to Antifa. Although the Antifa movement is obviously violent, its classification as a terrorist organization and its level of threat has often been a topic of contention. Even when accounting for all left-wing related attacks over the past 10 years, the overall rate of homicide is comparatively dwarfed by similar white supremacist groups or those inspired by the Islamic State. Although this channel would like to take a clear anti-fascism stance, we would like to condemn any forms of violence predicated on political ideology. We now come to Proud Boys, which unlike Antifa, are far more organized and structured. Created in 2016 by Canadian man Gavin McInnes, Proud Boys describe themselves as a pro-Western fraternal organization. They believe that Western culture, and by extension white men, are particularly under threat, and that they, quote, refuse to apologize for creating the world. The name, Proud Boys, comes from a song from Disney's 1992 film, Aladdin, that didn't make the final cut due to story changes in production.
Someday and soon, I'll make you proud of your boy.
Proud Boys believe in gun rights and have general libertarian views. They are officially against immigration, gender equality, and pretty much all other left-leaning ideology. Proud Boys have often been classified as a white supremacist organization. However, their beliefs regarding race are slightly more complicated. Officially, the group condemns all forms of racism, with the Proud Boys' current leader not exactly fitting the profile of a white supremacist. Proud Boys have however attended many events alongside white supremacist collections, and the FBI have designated the organization as an extremist group, but later clarified that only certain members were considered extremist threats with ties to white nationalism. Proud Boys target males between 15 to 30 for recruitment, and their 4-stage initiation process is admittedly hilarious. The first stage is an oath that praises the superiority of Western culture. The second stage involves the initiate getting punched while reciting a bunch of pop culture trivia, including 5 breakfast cereals. The third stage requires the initiate to get a Proud Boys tattoo and agreeing to not touch themselves more than once a month. And the fourth stage is getting into a major fight for the cause. This would be an opportune time to point out that the group claims to have an official stance of being against violence. However, its founder has previously mentioned that violent action is a really effective way to solve problems. The group have been involved in an impressive list of violent acts since 2017, most notably 2 members who were sentenced to 4 years in prison for attempted assault in 2018, and most recently a member charged with 6 felonies at the end of September this year. From what I could find, no murder has been attributed to the group. Proud Boys as an organization has historically used social media to fuel its recruitment drive, but lately has been banned on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. It seems that they may have also been blacklisted by internet service providers, as I wasn't able to access their official website while writing this script. This scrubbing of the group online was compounded by a trend of people from the gay community tagging their content with the Proud Boys hashtag, which generated roughly 88,000 posts within a 3-day period. It's currently difficult to say how significant both Antifa and Proud Boys actually are in the scheme of US politics. Estimates place membership of both groups at a few thousand at most, and although both entities have shown a clear willingness to use violence to achieve their goals, they are not nearly as dangerous when compared to more radical groups within the United States. It's likely that with the election only a few days away, in a country that's become increasingly more divided, that these groups have stolen more of the spotlight than is necessarily deserved. In any other year, the protests in Thailand would have probably received more attention than what we've given them, but due to its gradual nature and the tendency of something batshit fucking insane to happen every month, we've usually overlooked the country for more pressing stories. This month, however, I opened up an entirely new document, got myself an iced coffee, and valiantly gave the entire project to Jack the intern. On the 21st of February this year, Thailand's Constitutional Court ruled to dissolve one of the most prominent opposition parties in the country, the Future Forward Party. The court ruled that the party received an individual contribution that exceeded the limit for a personal donation, which led to 16 of the party's top officials from being banned from politics for the next 10 years. The donation was a very sizable sum, worth roughly 6 million freedom bucks, which, although exceeding the limit, has also been broken by several other parties in support of the current government, as outright banning an entire party and its leadership is more suspicious than your stepsister conveniently getting stuck in the washing machine.
How are you stuck in the dryer?
I don't know, it just happened, but I need you to help me.
You're not stuck, just move forward.
International organizations such as Human Rights Watch have since demanded that the party be reinstated and be allowed to continue. Soon after the Future Forward Party was banned, protesters originating from university campuses took to the streets in the thousands, and then along came the throbbing appendage of Corona. 5 months later, and even with a population of 69 million, Thailand contracted less than 3,300 cases and suffered a staggeringly low 58 deaths. Thanks to low rates of pre-existing conditions, widespread use of face masks, and Thailand's culture of social distancing, the threat of coronavirus was practically eliminated. The entire country just turned into a Jeremy Clarkson meme and got on with their day. By July, protesters felt safe enough to continue, and although a minority of demonstrators advocate for a complete dissolution of the monarchy, most simply want the royal family to have reduced power within the country. The Thai monarchy has also attracted criticism monetarily, with nearly 1% of the yearly budget being funneled directly to the royal family. Along with this, demonstrators have called for the abolition of laws that harshly punish critics of the crown, with instances of citizens being sent to jail or even exiled for comments made on social media platforms. Because of this, some protesters began using signs of Lord Voldemort in place of the king, referencing the Harry Potter character as someone else who cannot be named. Protesters hope to redraft the constitution to include more rights and protections for average citizens, so they don't have to use such references. As of October, protests have become much more heated and direct, and the government has since responded with tear gas and water cannons. As a result, many of these demonstrators have adopted tactics used by the notoriously well-organized protesters in Hong Kong, and have staged unpredictable flash mobs to avoid crackdowns. The team was contacted by a citizen of Thailand this month, who said on one occasion, police barricaded an area ahead of a planned protest, and in response, the demonstrators just moved to another location entirely. At the current time, it seems as if it may be a long road ahead for these people to live under a more fair and just government, and we can only hope that they achieve more success than other regions who have not been so lucky. Meanwhile, Chinese authorities banned an exhibit of Genghis Khan from using the words Genghis Khan. Parents whose children were killed in a school shooting are asked to legally prove that they're sad, and New Zealand officially has the gayest parliament in the world. In technology, Microsoft founder and on and off richest man on earth, Bill Gates, believes that the impending rise of artificial intelligence is ultimately a net positive for the world. Mr. Gates argues that although AI will inevitably take over an incredible number of jobs, it will also make the production of goods and services much more efficient. Gates makes the point that if society is able to produce all the food, homes, and consumer goods it needs, workers should be allowed to relax and focus on other interests. Ultimately, he argues that the increased productivity that comes from artificial intelligence will provide society with many more decisions and options in the future. Mr. Gates does admit, however, that governments will likely be forced to rework social safety nets for a huge number of workers who get displaced in this new economy, but still sees this as an absolute win for humanity. Emerging technologies have long been feared to eliminate jobs, especially in the short term, dating back at least as early as the Industrial Revolution. However, according to Google CEO Sundar Pichai, AI is more important to humanity than both the mastery of fire or the discovery of electricity. Disregarding the very sizable benefits of artificial intelligence, inadequate preparation for such a dramatic shift will likely be catastrophic for nations who do not properly prepare. According to the Council of Economic Advisors in 2016, 83% of jobs paying less than $20 an hour could have substantial parts of their work automated, and even professions such as doctors, accountants, and lawyers are said to be under threat. Viewers may even notice that this entire channel was just an artificial intelligence that was instructed to make low quality gaming videos, but over the course of 4 years has evolved into making low quality news videos as well. One individual who has been at the forefront of AI related policy has been Andrew Yang, who was a Democratic nominee for the 2020 election, before the American people determined that out of the 300 million people to choose from, Joe Biden and Donald Trump were the most qualified people to run the most powerful nation in the history of humanity. Andrew Yang argued that the inevitable rise of artificial intelligence would make it an opportune time to introduce a radical concept called Universal Basic Income. UBI would mean regularly giving a fixed amount of money to every citizen over the age of 18, regardless of how much money they currently earn or what they choose to spend their money on. In the case of Andrew Yang, he proposed $1,000 a month to all American adults, which he believed would allow citizens to solve their own problems and increase overall well-being. Part of this plan was to provide a safety net to those who expect to lose their jobs to automation over the next decade, and Mr. Yang argued that the money would allow citizens to take time to retrain for more relevant skills and to increase economic mobility. As an example, a person who lost their job to automation may now be in the financial position to start their own business, which would in theory be more likely to succeed, assuming that every citizen now has another $12,000 a year comfortably in their back pocket. This plan does understandably have its large share of critics. According to economist Cole Weidrequist, this would mean spending an additional $539 billion a year, which is a pretty big slice from a budget of roughly $4.5 trillion. However, when considering the absolutely fucking enormous $2 trillion stimulus the United States has spent on COVID-19 relief this year alone, it certainly seems at the very least within the realm of possibility. At least 10 countries around the globe have trialed universal basic income in the past, but due to this usually only being tested among at most a few thousand people at a time, the effect of an entire nation receiving such payments is yet to be fully understood. Whether UBI is truly the answer to the impending decimation of so many jobs currently worked today is frankly far beyond my understanding, but the success of nations worldwide will very likely be determined by its readiness for artificial intelligence going into the not so distant future. The International Energy Agency has officially announced solar energy to be the cheapest source of electricity in history. The agency's annual report has concluded that in most nations, it's cheaper per kilowatt to produce electricity from solar panels as opposed to by gas and coal alternatives. On top of this, some regions in particular are expected to see an even more favorable drop in cost going into the future, with the report predicting that India's solar price could drop by as much as 65%. India has understandably taken this information to heart and previously announced a record-breaking solar energy facility that would cover an absolute fucking batshit crazy 60,000 hectares. This equates to 600 square kilometers, or roughly 1,600,000 average McDonald's restaurants. 17 sovereign nations are smaller than this fucking solar farm. Similar to many of the memes, based on the premise that COVID has allowed nature to heal, the International Energy Agency also sees a slowed recovery to be particularly good for renewable energy. Even with a conservative estimate, and with COVID being brought under control, by 2021, 80% of growth in new power generation is predicted to come from renewables. A representative from the agency referenced Kangaroo Land as an ironic example of flawed policy, as despite it being the flattest continent on Earth, with an abundance of sunlight, new coal mines are still being set for approval. On a completely unrelated topic, here's the current Australian Prime Minister bringing in a lump of coal for show and tell in Parliament. In gaming, former Rockstar president Leslie Benzies has secured a $42 million round of funding for a game to rival Grand Theft Auto. This comes after his departure from the company in 2016, which saw him sue Rockstar for $150 million in unpaid royalties. Mr. Benzies has already hired over 130 people for his new development studio, including at least 4 key Rockstar employees that worked on GTA 5. The new game is currently called Everywhere and aims to offer a large variety of game modes and allow players to live the identities that they most want to explore. Not much else is currently known about the project, but it has been confirmed that it will use Amazon's Lumberyard game engine. It's currently unclear of whether this project will truly be a game to rival the Grand Theft Auto series, but previous examples give the title some promise. Titanfall was famously born out of leads for Call of Duty being fired. The Outer Worlds development team was made of mostly former Bethesda employees, and Destiny 2's resurgence was launched after it bought itself out of a contract with Activision. Microsoft head of gaming, Phil Spencer, has hinted that the company may be planning to sell streaming sticks for its cloud gaming service. The idea behind this concept is that instead of needing to buy an Xbox console at all, users can instead buy a streaming stick that plugs into their TV and with an Xbox controller, use Microsoft's cloud computing network to stream games directly to their television. In conjunction with the Xbox Game Pass, this would be the closest we've yet gotten to a Netflix for gaming type service, which would allow anyone with a fast enough internet connection to play available games without the need to download them at all. This is just the latest news into Microsoft's vision to push cloud streaming into the mainstream, and comes after its shaky relationship with Apple to bring xCloud to iPhones sometime next year. One story that was requested an unsurprising amount this month were rumors of a confirmed Titanfall 3, and seeing that both myself and Smurfs and the editor were frothing from the mouth at the possibility, this was something we needed to investigate. The rumor started when a Brazilian leaker by the name of the Neon Beast supposedly confirmed the game's existence on Twitter, which was then backed up by another leaker who reportedly heard the same thing from a different source. Both tweets have since been deleted, but this didn't stop us from contacting the Neon Beast with the assistance of a very helpful Titanfall fan who spoke Portuguese. This endeavor did not yield a reply, but if the rumors are to be believed, the unannounced title is still in early development. Now we start speculating. Respawn Entertainment currently has 3 development teams. One for Apex Legends, one for Star Wars titles, and another which will be releasing its Medal of Honor VR title in December, and it's this last one that seems to be the most promising. This third team supposedly wasn't even supposed to be working on a VR game, but shifted its priorities sometime in the development process, meaning it's unlikely that unless this title is wildly successful, they probably won't stay as a dedicated VR team. Respawn representatives have also stated that teams act independently from one another, meaning that Apex Legends developers would not be assigned to work on a Titanfall project. This now leads us to make the admittedly bold assumption that the team working on this VR project will immediately start working on Titanfall 3 as soon as the game has gone gold. From there, assuming that this wild speculation is all 100% true, we can estimate from the time between Titanfall 1 and Titanfall 2, Respawn will need at least 2.5 years to develop such a title. However, to factor in potential downtime and an entirely new console generation, we'll give them a little bit extra, making my blind dartboard official prediction for a new Titanfall game between September 2023 and April 2024. Notable games that came out in this month include Star Wars Squadrons, Baldur's Gate 3, Watch Dogs Legion, and Age of Empires 3 Definitive Edition. November is going to be a particularly good time to be a game enthusiast, with the release of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Call of Duty Cold War, Marvel Spider-Man, Godfall, Destiny 2 Beyond Light, and both the PS5 and Xbox Series X. This has been the news for this month. Besides thanking our list of Patreon supporters, who funded both this video and the one we released on the US election candidates a week ago, this would also be a good time to plug all those other places that we often overlook. Links to my Twitter and dedicated subreddit will be in the description for those interested, but also for the Scrub Hub Discord server, which now has a dedicated channel where you can send all news suggestions. Here's hoping that this streamlines the process of story proposals better than what we've had previously. On behalf of the entire team, I'd like to wish everyone a happy November of 2020.
Whoa.